It was written in his handwriting, steady, familiar, and full of love. A letter I was told not to open until 30 days after his death. I sat in the attorney's office, my hands trembling as I unfolded the paper. "They think you need to be managed," David wrote. "But you are not a burden. You are a woman of strength. My husband had seen the truth long before I could, and what he left behind for me was more than a house." 3 weeks after David's funeral, the house still smelled faintly of lilies and old perfume. The sympathy card stood untouched on the side table in the living room, gathering dust next to a casserole dish someone had dropped off, and I hadn't had the heart to return. I hadn't touched much since that day. Not the mail, not the guest linens people used when they came to pay their respects. Not even the coffee mug on the counter that read "World's Best Grandma." That mug used to make me smile every morning. Now it just sat there cold and full of silence. The mornings were the worst. When the house was too quiet and too loud all at once, the echo of David's footsteps, the rustle of his newspaper, the sound of him humming as he brewed his coffee, gone, and in their place this nothingness that pressed in around me like fog. Some people say grief is loud, but mine came in whispers in stillness, in the ache of not hearing a voice I'd heard every day for 35 years. I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window above the sink, watching a squirrel dart across the fence line. I hadn't slept well, and the cold tile floor beneath my feet reminded me that I still hadn't put on shoes. My phone buzzed on the counter beside me. It was Ryan. Again. For a moment, I considered letting it ring, but then I picked up. I didn't even say hello before he launched into it. "Mom, we need to talk about the house." His voice was clipped businesslike. He always had that tone when he was trying to sound helpful, but was really just impatient. I had heard it since he was a teenager asking for gas money. "The house is too big for you alone," he continued. "Brooklyn and I have been looking into options." "Good morning to you too, Ryan," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Don't start with me. We've been talking about this for days now. It's not sustainable, Mom. The taxes, the maintenance, it's a lot. You can't possibly keep up with all of it on your own." "There's no mortgage," I replied flatly, walking over to pour myself a cup of coffee I didn't really want. "David paid it off 5 years ago." There was a pause, then a short sarcastic laugh. One that sounded a lot like his father's, but without the warmth. "Come on, Mom. We know what Dad's pension looks like. We all know you're under financial strain." I didn't answer. I just stared into the coffee, watching the cream swirl into stormy patterns. Ryan wasn't asking if I was okay. He was calculating, planning, managing me like I was a spreadsheet that didn't add up. "We're just concerned," he added, softening his tone slightly, but it still felt rehearsed. "Lillian agrees." Lillian. My daughter, the one who hadn't called once since the funeral. Not even a text. I turned away from the window, back to the room that now felt too large, too empty. "When exactly did Lillian share this opinion with you?" I asked. "We had dinner last night. As a family, we talked about your options. Not how's Mom holding up. Not should we visit her and check in, no. Just options. Like I was a logistical problem, not a grieving widow." I walked to the fridge and opened it more out of habit than anything. It was still filled with dishes from neighbors. Mac and cheese lasagna, Jell-O with fruit in it. I hadn't touched any of it. And these options include what exactly, I asked. Well, Ryan said selling the house makes the most sense. You'd get a good amount and that money could help all of us. Brooklyn and I are looking at that colonial on Maple Street, and Lillian's been worrying about Zoe's college fund. So, a win-win situation, I said quietly. Exactly. I closed the fridge door harder than I meant to. The noise startled me. "Ryan," I said, "have you asked me what I want, Mom?" "Come on. Don't be dramatic. This is about what makes sense. It's time." He always said that. It's time. Like there was a clock somewhere I couldn't see ticking down the minutes to when I was no longer useful unless I could offer something. I ended the call soon after that, making up some excuse about needing to rest. But I didn't go back to bed. Instead, I went into David's study. The room was exactly as he had left it. His desk was tidy papers stacked in neat piles, pens lined up in a mug from a company he'd retired from 10 years ago. The chair still carried the faint scent of his aftershave. I sat down slowly and opened the bottom drawer, the one he always kept locked, though he had given me the key years ago. In case something happens, he'd said with a smile I hadn't understood then. Inside were folders, neatly labeled investments, pension, legal. But one stood out, a cream-colored folder labeled Hawaii. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were documents I hadn't seen before. Deeds, bank statements, notes in David's careful handwriting, and a photograph of a small house near the beach, palm trees swaying in the background. It looked peaceful, untouched, like a place where grief might soften around the edges. I stared at the photo for a long time. David had bought us a house in Hawaii, and he hadn't told the kids. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I felt something settle in my chest, something steady like the foundation of that house he'd prepared. He had seen this coming. Not just his death, but their reaction. The pressure, the push, the greed disguised as concern. And he had made sure I would have somewhere to go. Somewhere warm. Somewhere mine. I closed the folder gently and placed it on the desk in front of me. For the first time since the funeral, I knew what I had to do. And I didn't need to ask anyone's permission. A few days after Ryan's call, Brooklyn texted me. It was short, polite, and rehearsed, just like everything else that came from her. "Hey, Carolyn, just wanted to let you know Ryan spoke to his cousin Gregory. He's in real estate and might have a buyer lined up for your place. No pressure, of course. Just options. No pressure." That phrase rolled around in my mind like a pebble in my shoe. Always there, always irritating. Gregory, someone I barely knew, was already scouting buyers for a house I still lived in, a house David and I had built a life in, a house where I could still close my eyes and hear the laughter of birthday parties, the soft hum of David's old vinyls, the footsteps of 2 little children who once called this place home. They called it helping. I called it premeditated displacement. Later that evening, the phone rang again. This time it was Lillian. "Hi, Mom," she said in that overly sweet tone she used when she wanted something or felt guilty for not calling. "I've been thinking about you." I didn't answer right away. "I know things have been hard. Ryan told me you seemed overwhelmed. Brooklyn's right. We just want to make sure you're okay." I waited. The real purpose was coming. We were talking and... "Well, if it does come to selling the house, I wanted you to know you'd be more than welcome here. You could stay in the basement. It's fully finished. Separate entrance, your own bathroom. Privacy, comfort. It could work. Basement. Separate entrance. Privacy. Like a tenant. Or a boarder. Not a mother." "Mom," she asked when I didn't respond. "I remember the basement," I said softly. "What Thanksgiving? Last year?" There was silence on the line. "You told me there wasn't enough room at the table. That with Zoe's friends visiting from college and your in-laws in town, it just made more sense for me to sit downstairs with the kids." "Oh, Mom." I sat on a folding chair next to a ping-pong table, Lillian, eating reheated turkey off a paper plate while you and your husband toasted with champagne upstairs. It wasn't like that. "No," I asked, "because that's how it felt." She paused again. "I just thought, maybe it could be a fresh start." For who I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I stared across the kitchen at the corkboard filled with photos. David and I at our 25th anniversary. Ryan and Lillian as kids, arms flung around each other in a sunlit backyard. Zoe, on her first day of school, clutching a lunchbox I had packed for her with homemade cookies and a little note that said, "You've got this, sunshine." What had happened to all that love? When did it become a negotiation? That night I couldn't sleep. I got up and wandered through the house. It was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge and the creak of the wooden floors. I ended up in the hallway facing the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired. Gray roots peeking through once dark hair, wrinkles deeper around the mouth and eyes that had seen too much too fast in the past month. I used to recognize this face. I used to feel proud of the woman behind it. But now I saw a checklist. To Ryan in Brooklyn, the owner of a valuable property that could solve their down payment problem. To Lillian, a live-in babysitter and cook who came with her own retirement funds. To both a liability, a problem to be solved, a name to move off a deed. I touched the edge of the mirror, not knowing what I expected to feel. Maybe something solid. Maybe something real. "I'm still here," I whispered. "Even if you don't see me." For the first time, I wasn't sure if that was enough. Later, I returned to David's study, not to reread the Hawaii papers, though I would eventually. This time I just wanted to sit where he used to sit, to breathe in the scent of old paper-polished wood and quiet competence. David had always believed in preparing for storms even when the sky was clear. I used to tease him about that. Now I was starting to see the wisdom in it. They thought they were helping me. That's what hurt the most. The way they wrapped their manipulation in the language of love. Just options. No pressure. Only thinking of your well-being. But it wasn't about me. Not really. It was about what I had, and how useful it might be to them. They didn't ask how I was sleeping. They didn't ask if I was eating or if I needed someone to sit beside me in the evenings when the silence got too heavy. They asked about the house. They asked about money. And now they were planning my next move. Into a basement. Into quiet service. Into smallness. But David hadn't left me small. He left me space. And soon I was going to step into it. The next morning I woke with a strange clarity, like something had quietly settled into place overnight. The light coming through the curtains was soft golden, and I sat up slowly, letting my feet touch the floor like I had somewhere to be, somewhere important. David's study called to me again. I hadn't moved the folder since I found it hadn't gone beyond the surface of what was inside. I told myself I needed time, that I wasn't ready to face all of it. But the truth was, I was afraid of what I might discover. What if the house in Hawaii had complications? What if there were debts or conditions? What if it wasn't as simple as it seemed? But David wasn't a complicated man. He was thorough, meticulous, a quiet planner who never showed his hand until he was sure the table was steady. I brewed coffee this time, taking a sip, and carried the mug into the study like a small act of courage. I placed it on the desk, opened the folder, and began reading page by page. There it was, black and white, legal documentation notarized and stamped, the deed to the Hawaii house, fully paid. In my name. Not joint ownership, not a trust shared with Ryan or Lillian, just mine. There was a stack of bank statements next, carefully labeled and sorted, showing transfers, deposits, and a regular stream of investment income I hadn't realized David had maintained. Mutual funds, dividend stocks, even a small pension from an old government contract he never talked much about. I flipped to the next file and saw something smaller. A folded note paper clipped to a statement. On it, in David's handwriting, "For Carolyn when she's ready to choose herself." Underneath was a passbook savings account, $50,000, set aside in monthly installments over the last 3 years, every deposit labeled with the same 3 words, Independence Fund account. I stared at the page, my heart tight in my chest. He had saved it in secret, not because he was hiding it from me, but because he was protecting me from them. From the very situation I found myself in now. A quiet parachute in case the world fell apart, and it had, not in one violent crash but in slow fractures, funeral flowers fading in corners, calls filled with cold logistics, memories erased for the sake of resale value. I sat back in his chair and let myself feel what I hadn't allowed to rise in weeks. Not grief this time, not confusion, power, not the kind that roars, the kind that settles. That grounds you. That whispers, You have more options than they think. I picked up the phone and dialed the number listed on one of the legal folders. I had never met David's attorney in person, only spoken to her once briefly when we updated our wills years ago. But her name, Hannah Lowell, was as familiar to me now as any family member's. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was clear, professional, and warm. "Mrs. Lawson," she said, "I've been expecting your call. That startled me. You have—" "Yes. Your husband left specific instructions. I was told to speak to you directly and only you no sooner than 30 days after his passing." I swallowed hard. "It's been 32. There was a quiet pause on the other end, like she respected the weight of that time. "Do you have time to come in today?" she asked. "There are a few things he wanted you to have personally." 2 hours later, I stood in Hannah's office, the scent of leather-bound books and soft lavender hanging in the air. Her desk was immaculate, her suit understated. She looked like the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and never lost a post-it note. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I sat down, careful with my purse, suddenly aware of my age, my grief, the weight I had been carrying that no one else seemed to see. Hannah opened a folder and spread the contents before me. "Your husband was very precise," she said. "He updated everything 3 years ago after a conversation he had with your son." My eyebrows lifted. He didn't give details, only that he no longer trusted his original estate plan. He removed both your children from any claim to physical property. They remain beneficiaries of his life insurance, and that's it. She let the information land gently. Everything else, the investments, the accounts, the Hawaii property, belongs to you alone. I felt the breath leave my lungs. "And the house here," I asked, almost afraid to ask it aloud. "Also, in your name only," she said, "has been for years. He removed your children's potential stake in it after your son asked him to co-sign on a restaurant venture." I remembered that argument. How angry Ryan had been when David refused. I had stood in the kitchen afterward, upset with David for being too hard on him. He had just shaken his head and said, "One day you'll understand." "I thought he was being cruel," I whispered. "No," Hannah said. "He was protecting you." She pushed a cream envelope toward me. "He also left this, told me to give it to you exactly 1 month after his passing." My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. His handwriting on the front. "For Carolyn, only when the fog starts to lift." I didn't open it right away. I held it in my lap, feeling the weight of his thoughtfulness, of his love. He hadn't just seen this coming, he had prepared for it, planned for the moment when I would realize I'd been made small in my own family, when I'd feel like I was unraveling. David had known, and he'd left me a map. I stood at the window of the law office, envelope in hand, looking out at the city street. People bustled past, unaware, and for the first time since David died, I felt my shoulders straighten just slightly. I wasn't broke, I wasn't helpless, and I certainly wasn't alone. As I turned back toward Hannah, I caught my reflection in the glass. My face looked the same. But something behind my eyes had shifted. I smiled. A small one. But real. David knew. He always did. It was a strange thing. Realizing your children no longer saw you as a person. Not quite sudden, not quite gradual. Just inevitable. Like the slow erosion of something once cherished left out in the weather too long. After I left Hannah's office and returned home, I sat in the middle of the living room surrounded by familiar furniture and unfamiliar thoughts. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful anymore. It had changed. It felt like waiting, like something or someone was about to knock everything over. And the truth was, maybe it already had. Ryan and Lillian used to call me Mom like it meant something, like I was the center of their universe. Sticky fingers on my cheeks, bedtime stories, macaroni art with glitter glued crookedly across paper hearts. I had once been the person they ran to. Now I was a name on a deed. An asset with legs. I thought back to the last real conversation I'd had with Lillian, before David died. She had called to ask if I'd send Zoe a birthday package early because she was too swamped with work. I had gone all out. Baked Zoe's favorite cookies, found a hoodie in her college colors, and tucked a $100 bill inside the card with a note that said, "For coffee or adventure, your choice." No reply. Just a generic group text, "Thank you" from Zoe a week later. And then silence. Since Christmas, not a single call. Not even after David's funeral. Not a single, "How are you doing, Grandma?" But I had kept sending the money. $500 every month. Quietly deposited into Zoe's account for 2 straight years. Not because anyone asked. Not because I was expected to, but because I knew how tight things were. Because Lillian once cried to me about tuition and late fees, and how she didn't want Zoe to feel like she had to give up her dream school. So I helped. Month after month, I cut back on groceries, clipped coupons, skipped new shoes. I adjusted. I made it work. I never told David. I didn't want him to worry. And I never told Ryan or Lillian. I just did it, because that's what mothers do. But now I wondered if Zoe even knew where the money came from. Did Lillian ever tell her, or did she take credit? "Your mother is handling everything," I could hear her saying. "We've got it covered." Maybe she wanted to seem like the hero. Maybe she thought it would confuse Zoe to know her grandmother, the same woman she now ignored, was the one keeping her going at school. Or maybe she just didn't think it mattered. My hand tightened around the edge of the photo album on my lap. I flipped it open and stared down at a picture of Ryan when he was 9, beaming with a gap-toothed grin, holding a plastic trophy from a school science fair. I had stayed up half the night helping him build that volcano. He told his class I had nothing to do with it. That's when it started, I think. The beginning of being invisible. Lillian's page came next. A school recital, her hair in pigtails, me in the front row holding a camcorder. After the performance, she had hugged her music teacher first. I didn't think much of it back then. I brushed it off. But now in the context of everything, it stung. 30 years of putting their needs ahead of mine. 30 years of saying yes when I wanted to say no. 30 years of being the foundation they stood on while they climbed higher. And not once, had either of them asked what I needed. I closed the album and placed it back in the cabinet. Then I did something I hadn't done since David died. I made a decision, not a passive one, not a slow burn resignation. A decision rooted in quiet clarity. I picked up the phone and called a local moving company. "Hi," I said, "I'd like to schedule a pickup. Not for a full move, just for some personal items to be delivered to 2 separate addresses." The man on the other end was kind professional. He asked what kind of items. I told him boxes of childhood memorabilia. A piano, an armchair, a dining set. He asked where they were going. "One set to my son," I said, "and the other to my daughter." He paused, maybe unsure of how to respond. I gave him the addresses, scheduled the date, and hung up. Then I walked down the hall to the guest rooms. Ryan's old room, Lillian's old room, and opened the closets. I pulled down dusty boxes of trophies, notebooks, yearbooks, Halloween costumes. I'd saved tiny baby shoes I couldn't bear to throw away. One by one, I began packing. I wrapped each item in tissue paper gently, carefully, as if I were preparing a time capsule for someone who had forgotten their own story. I labeled each box for Ryan, for Lillian. I made sure to include the things they used to claim they wanted one day. The piano Lillian had begged for, the leather armchair Ryan used to fight David for during football games. All the things they said they'd take eventually when I was ready to downsize. Well, I was ready. Not because they told me to be, not because I had to be, because I had chosen to be. As I packed, I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. I felt clear, unburdened. These items belonged to their past. But I didn't belong to their plans anymore. They had tried to erase me from the picture. I was simply moving out of the frame. Later that night, I found one more box tucked high on the closet shelf. Zoe's things. Old drawings, letters, a pair of tiny ballet slippers from when she was 4. I held them in my hands for a long time, wondering what she remembered, wondering what she'd been told. I didn't pack that box. Not yet. Some part of me still held out hope that Zoe might remember me on her own terms, that one day she might call. Not because she was told to, not because she needed something, but because she missed me. I set the box aside. And then I walked into the kitchen, turned off the lights, and stood in the dark for a moment. The moving truck would be here in 3 days, and when it came, I would be ready. The moving truck pulled into my driveway at precisely 7:00 a.m., just as promised. I stood at the upstairs window in my robe, sipping coffee and watching the men in navy shirts and steel-toed boots unload dollies and straps. They moved with quiet efficiency, and it struck me how much dignity there was in people who simply did their job without drama or demands. At the same time, a sleek gray SUV pulled up to the curb. Ryan, he stepped out of the car dressed in what he probably thought was his serious business suit, a pale yellow one that Brooklyn had once insisted made him look confident. To me, he looked like someone who'd come to sell a timeshare in the middle of grief. He was holding a manila folder, thick, bulging. I could picture the contents even before he stepped through the door, printed contracts, highlighted clauses, a place for me to sign. He didn't ring the doorbell. He knocked. 3 sharp, impatient taps. I opened the door without a word. His eyes were already darting around the house, scanning boxes labeled Ryan's room and Lillian's keepsakes. When he saw the movers walking out with David's favorite leather armchair, his face shifted. First confusion, then something else. Something like fear. "Mom," he said, stepping inside. "What's going on? Why is there a moving truck in your driveway?" "I'm having a few things delivered," I said calmly. He blinked. Delivered where I turned and started walking toward the kitchen. "Let's talk." He followed fast. Wait, what's going on? Why is Dad's chair on the truck? And is that the piano?" I poured myself another cup of coffee and took a seat at the table where David and I used to have breakfast every Sunday. Ryan stayed standing, his posture rigid like he was bracing for something. "These are your things," I said. "Memories. Family pieces. I thought you'd want them." "Why now?" he demanded. Why all of a sudden I looked at him, really looked. And I realized I hadn't done that in years, not as a mother gazing at her son, but as a woman seeing another adult for who he had become. "You told me I should move," I said, "that this house was too much for me, that it made financial sense to sell." "You and Brooklyn found a buyer, didn't you?" "Gregory's client." He opened the folder and slid it across the table. "Yes, he's ready to make an offer. Cash, quick closing. All we need is your signature." I didn't even glance at the papers. "Where did you tell him the money would go?" I asked. Ryan blinked. "What?" I folded my hands on the table. Did you tell him how the sale proceeds would be split? Did you calculate how much you and Lillian would get after imaginary closing costs and whatever assistance I supposedly need? His jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" He stayed silent. I leaned back. "Let me ask you something else. When you and Lillian had dinner to discuss my options, did either of you ask how I was doing? Of course we care about you. Did you ask if I was sleeping?" I pressed. "If I was eating? If I needed company? Did you ask what I wanted to do with my life now that I'm alone for the first time in 35 years? His mouth opened and closed. I stood slowly and walked over to David's armchair, still sitting by the front door waiting to be carried out. I rested my hand on the worn leather. "You didn't care about my grief," I said softly. "You cared about what you could take from it." "Mom, that's not true." "Then let's talk about the numbers," I said sharply, turning back to him. "If this house sells for $350,000 and you split it with your sister after your fictional mortgage deductions and fees, you'd each walk away with around $160,000, give or take." He went pale. "Do you know what your father's pension pays me every month?" I asked. He shook his head. $4,200, I said, plus Social Security. plus dividends from investments you've never bothered to ask about. I'm not struggling, Ryan. I've never been struggling. You lied to us, he said, voice low. I didn't lie, I said. You assumed I just didn't correct you. He looked stunned, like the script he had prepared no longer made sense. You wanted to believe I was weak. I continued because it made it easier to treat me like a problem to solve instead of a person to support. He collapsed onto the bottom stair, holding his folder like a shield. So, what now? I picked up the folder, flipped through the pages without reading them, and placed it gently back in his lap. You asked me to move out, I said. I'm moving. He stared up at me. Wait, what does that mean? It means the movers are taking these boxes to your house and Lillian's today. One delivery to Maple Street, the other to Pine Avenue. He blinked. They'll ring the bell and tell you they're gifts, I said. Gifts from me. Memories you might want to keep safe. Mom, please, he said, rising to his feet. We can figure something else out. You don't have to go live in Lillian's basement. We'll find you a place. A nice apartment. More manageable. More manageable for whom? The question hung between us like a hammer about to fall. Ryan opened his mouth, searching for words that wouldn't incriminate him. My phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up. Lillian, I said, showing him the screen. Why don't we answer it together? He shook his head. Don't. But I did. Mom, what is this insanity? Lillian's voice burst through the speaker. There's a moving truck at my house. 2 men are trying to deliver a piano I don't have room for. I smiled faintly. The piano you begged for when you were 8. I thought you'd want it back. I don't want it back. And Ryan just called me about this ridiculous idea that you're not selling the house. The house isn't being sold. Silence. What do you mean it's not being sold? She hissed. I mean exactly that, I said. This is my house. Your father left it to me. Entirely, I'm not selling it. But Ryan said... Ryan was wrong about many things. Another silence, heavier this time. You're playing games, Lillian said coldly. People are counting on this. No, dear, I said. They were counting on me not knowing my own worth. I ended the call and looked back at Ryan. He looked hollow. I suggest you make room in the garage, I said. Your childhood is on its way home. I was sitting on the lanai, the ocean wind soft against my skin when the call came. My coffee had long gone cold in my hands, but I didn't care. The horizon was painted in strokes of gold and blue, the sky so wide it made everything else feel small. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was breathing in the right rhythm again. Then my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I'd turned it off for days, letting voicemail collect the noise I no longer needed. But something made me check the screen this time. Zoe. My heart hesitated. It was the first time she'd reached out since Christmas. I answered on the 4th ring. Grandma? Oh my God. Finally, her voice came fast, breathless. I've been trying to reach you for days. I said nothing at first, just listened. Where are you? She asked, panic bubbling beneath the surface. Mom won't tell me anything. All she said was that you and Uncle Ryan had some fight, and now you're... gone. What's happening? Why is there drama about a house sale that didn't happen? Are you okay? I took a breath. Zoe, I said gently. Slow down. I can't. I'm furious. Do you know what Mom told me yesterday? I closed my eyes, letting the ocean sound fill the silence between us. She told me you've been sending me money. $500 every month for 2 years. She said it like it was this big burden she'd been hiding to protect me. But Grandma, her voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me that question, so simple and full of pain, cut through me like a paper-thin wound? Because your mother thought it was better that way, I said softly. Better for who she cried. Better for her, so she could take credit. Better for Uncle Ryan, so he could pretend you were struggling and needed to sell your house. Grandma, I am so ashamed. Zoe, I said quickly. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Yes, I do, she said. And now she was crying. I let them convince me you were just some sad old lady who needed to be managed. I stopped calling you because Mom said you were fragile, that if I talked to you too much, you might get too attached. She said it was healthier to give you space to grieve. Healthier. That word felt like such a lie now. A clean word used to cover something twisted. So I gave you space. Zoe continued, her voice rising. And meanwhile, you were paying for my textbooks and my sorority fees and probably even that stupid spring break trip. And I didn't even thank you. I didn't even check on you. And now they're telling everyone you've had a breakdown, that you disappeared. I let the silence stretch a little before I spoke. No, sweetheart, I haven't had a breakdown. I looked out at the water, at the waves rolling in with quiet certainty. I've finally had enough. The line went quiet for a beat. Are you really in Hawaii? She whispered. Yes. Like, the actual state, I smiled. The one with palm trees and warm sand and sunsets that make you cry a little. Grandma, she said, her voice smaller now. I want to come see you. I froze. Not because I didn't want her there, but because I hadn't expected the request. Not so soon. Not in that voice. You do, I need to. I don't care what Mom says. I don't care if it's spring break or not. I can cancel the trip to Cancun. I probably only get to go because of you anyway. I let out a soft laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was honest. Please, she said. I want to meet this version of you. The one who lives by the ocean and doesn't answer the phone when people try to guilt her. I want to sit next to you and talk like real people, not like characters in someone else's narrative. There was a long pause. I miss you, she whispered. That's when I felt it. The weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The ache of being forgotten, misunderstood, pushed aside. It shifted. Not gone, not yet. But lighter. I miss you too, I said. There was another pause, then her voice again soft and hopeful. Can I come next week? Yes, I said. You can. The relief in her voice made my eyes sting. Thank you, Grandma. Thank you for not hanging up, for not giving up on me. I would never give up on you, I said. After we hung up, I sat for a long time with the phone in my lap. The wind tugged at my hair, the scent of salt in the air like a promise. I looked over at the envelope from the travel agency, my original one-way ticket to Hawaii, and beside it now sat something new, a reservation for a return trip. Not for me, for her, for Zoe, the girl who was finally seeing me, not as someone who needed to be managed, but as someone who still had stories to tell. The air in Hawaii was different. It wasn't just the warmth, though that was a welcome contrast to the biting chill I'd left behind. It was something else, something quieter, like the island itself was breathing slowly and asking me to do the same. As I stepped off the plane, I felt my shoulders lower, my chest expand. It was the first inhale in weeks that didn't feel like I was bracing for something. Camilla was waiting just beyond the baggage claim, holding a hand-painted sign that said, Mrs. Lawson, in big blue letters. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her eyes lit up the second she saw me. No polite half-smile, no small talk out of obligation. Just warmth, like I was returning home to someone who had been waiting with the light on. Welcome, Carolyn, she said. And then she hugged me. Not a stiff hug, not a careful pat, but a true arms wrapped around you kind of embrace that went straight to the part of me that had been quietly starving for touch. David told me so much about you. I feel like I already know you. I blinked back the surprise in my eyes. He talked about me. All the time, she said, taking my suitcase from me with ease. He said, My Carolyn will make this place sing again. I didn't have words for that. Not then, not yet. The drive from the airport was slow and winding. Camilla pointed out fruit stands and quiet beaches, small cafes tucked into alleyways, surfboards leaned against pastel-colored houses. She narrated the route like someone giving a tour to an old friend, not a stranger. As we pulled into the narrow drive that led to the house, my heart clenched. There it was. Small whitewashed, framed by lush green and bursts of flowers I didn't know the names of. The blue shutters caught the afternoon light like open arms, and a breeze carried the scent of something sweet and citrusy. Lemon trees, I realized, lining the path to the front porch. I stepped out of the car and stood still. Camila smiled beside me. He chose it for the view. Said you'd need something that made you feel small in the best way. I nodded, unable to speak. Inside the house was simple but intentional. Terracotta floors cool underfoot. A living room with a cream-colored couch, a wooden dining table with space for 4 built-in shelves waiting to be filled. The windows opened wide to the ocean. You could hear the waves in every corner. The kitchen had copper pots hanging from hooks, white and blue tiles that mirrored the sea beyond. It didn't feel like a vacation home. It felt like it had been waiting for someone to live in it fully. I stocked the basics. Camila said, opening a cabinet to reveal fruit olive oil, a bottle of wine. Tomorrow we'll go to the market. But tonight, you rest. She didn't fuss. She didn't hover. She simply showed me around, handed me a set of keys, and pointed to her own house across the small lane. I'm just there. You need anything day or night. David made me promise. When she left, the quiet wasn't lonely. It was spacious. I stood in the kitchen a while longer, letting my fingers brush the counters, the smooth ceramic, the delicate edge of a small bowl that had likely been hand-thrown. Everything was soft here, gentle, not a single sharp edge or forced smile in sight. I walked into the bedroom, simple, clean, with crisp white linens and a window that opened directly to the ocean. On the nightstand sat a framed photo of David, one I hadn't seen before. He was younger, standing barefoot in the backyard, holding a coffee mug and laughing at something off camera. His whole body looked lighter. I sat on the bed and stared at that photo for a long time. I didn't know you bought all this for me, I whispered. But thank you. It was hours before I realized I hadn't cried. Not because the grief was gone, but because something else had finally shown up in its place. Peace. Not the pretend kind, not the quiet you get from people walking on eggshells. Real peace. Like being seen finally not as a burden or a relic, but as a woman who had made it through the fire and still had something left to say. Later that evening, I wandered back into the living room. The sun was setting in slow waves of coral and pink, turning the sea into a mirror of the sky. I poured myself a glass of wine, took it out to the terrace, and sat down in a chair that faced the water. The breeze danced across my skin like a soft conversation, and I realized something. For the first time in decades, there was no noise, no expectation, no errands to run for someone else, no schedules to memorize that weren't mine, no guilt hovering like a second skin. Just me, the sea, and a quiet space that belonged only to me. I went back inside and opened the drawer of the writing desk near the window. Inside was a small notebook, leather-bound, still blank. I reached for my laptop instead. The screen flickered to life and I opened a new document. At the top, I typed 3 words. Living for me. I stared at the title for a moment. Then I began to write. Not about my children, not about the hurt or the silence, but about the moments no one noticed. The invisible work of a woman who held a family together with soft hands and unspoken strength. The slow unraveling of self that came when love became service, and service became expectation. And how, in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected gift, I had found myself again. I kept writing long into the night. I waited outside the small airport in Kauai, the late morning sun warm on my shoulders, the breeze carrying the faint scent of hibiscus and sea salt. The arrivals door slid open and closed, one traveler at a time trickling out, scanning the crowd, pulling luggage behind them. I held a small paper sign that simply said Zoe. Not because I thought she wouldn't recognize me, but because I didn't know if I'd recognize her. And then I saw her. She wore a white t-shirt, a faded pair of jeans sneakers that had definitely seen better days. Her dark hair was tied back in a messy bun, sunglasses pushed to the top of her head. No makeup, no curated expression, just a soft smile that bloomed the moment she saw me. She dropped her backpack and ran. When her arms wrapped around me, it wasn't the awkward side hug I'd grown used to at family gatherings. It wasn't the quick, "Hi, Grandma, how have you been?" hug. It was full-bodied, desperate, and honest. Her face pressed against my shoulder like she'd needed this as much as I had. "Oh, Grandma," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I'm so sorry." I held her tighter. "You're here now. That's what matters." The drive to the house was quiet at first. Zoe pressed her face to the window, wide-eyed like a child on her first road trip. She pointed out the lush green cliffs, the sea foam crashing against the rocks, the chickens that wandered freely at the roadside. "This place doesn't feel real," she said finally. "It feels like a movie set." I smiled. "That's what David said the first time he came here." She turned to look at me. "He really bought this just for you." "He did. He wanted me to have somewhere I could breathe." She was silent for a while. "Then I think he knew I'd need to find you here too." At the house, she stood in the garden for a long time. The bougainvillea spilled over the walls in waves of fuchsia and purple. The lemon trees were heavy with fruit. She reached out and touched one of the leaves as if making sure it wasn't painted. Inside, I had prepared her room. Simple, like everything else in this house. The sheets were fresh, the windows open, and a small vase of wildflowers sat by the bed. That evening we ate on the terrace as the sun dipped low. Camila had insisted on making paella for Zoe's arrival, and Zoe devoured it like she hadn't eaten all day. She asked questions about the house, about Camila, about David. And then as the sky turned pink and the stars began to blink to life above the horizon, she asked me something no one in my family had ever asked before. "Grandma, what did you used to dream about?" I blinked. "What do you mean, before you were a wife, before you were a mom, when you were just, you..." I stared at her, stunned by the question. Not because it was complicated, but because it had never been asked. Not once. Not by David. Not by the kids. Not by anyone. I took a breath. When I was young, I said slowly, I wanted to be a writer. I used to fill spiral notebooks with stories. Some of them were ridiculous. Romance novels set in castles, others were about women traveling the world alone, solving mysteries, falling in love with languages, with themselves. I used to sit under the maple tree in our backyard and write until the sun went down. What happened? Life. I said not bitterly, just truthfully. David's job required us to move. Then came Ryan, then Lillian. Money was tight. I went back to school part-time, worked in the library. I kept writing here and there. Grocery lists, Christmas letters, journal entries when I had time. But somewhere along the way I stopped being Carolyn. I became someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's dependable background character. Zoe reached for my hand across the table. "You're not a background character," she said fiercely. "You're the reason the story exists." I didn't answer. My throat had grown too tight. She was quiet for a long time after that. Then she whispered, "I thought you were just the lady who sent birthday cards." That made me laugh. "Well, I am very good at remembering birthdays." "No," she said. That's how I saw you. Kind, quiet, polite. But flat, like a character in a coloring book that someone only ever filled in with beige." I laughed again, louder this time. "Beige?" She grinned. "I was wrong. You're bright red. You're the whole damn sunset." The moment sat between us, heavy in the best way. Then she said, "Grandma, can I stay for a while?" My eyebrows rose. "How long is a while? I don't know," she said, shrugging. "A week. 2. A month. Don't you have school?" I called my professors. They're letting me do independent study for the rest of the semester. I can submit papers, take online exams. I stared at her. Look, she said, I don't want to go back yet. I want to be here. With you. I want to learn who you really are, not the version I've been fed, not the idea of a grandmother I carried around in my head. I want the real one. I swallowed. Why now? Because she said softly for 20 years, I didn't ask, and I might not get another chance. The stars above us blinked into view one by one, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone reaching backward in regret. I felt like someone being seen, really seen. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You can stay, I said. You can stay as long as you need. She exhaled relief and joy written across her face, and in that moment I felt something shift, not just between us but inside me. This wasn't just about reclaiming my life. It was about finally being loved, not for what I could give, but for who I had always been. The messages came in waves. First from Ryan, short, urgent, apologetic. Mom, I think we had a misunderstanding. Please call me. We can talk about everything. Then another. Brooklyn thinks this got out of hand. Let's fix it. We didn't mean to pressure you. Then came the shift. Mom, seriously, you're being unreasonable now. You can't just disappear and expect everything to be fine. By the 6th voicemail, his tone was brittle, frustrated. Fine. Do what you want. Just don't expect us to clean it up when it all falls apart. I didn't respond to any of it. Lillian's messages came later. More polished, more passive-aggressive. The first email read, Hi, Mom, just checking in. We're all a little confused. Ryan mentioned you're in Hawaii. I wish you'd told us. We're concerned. Another followed hours later. It's really not okay to ghost your family, especially after everything we've been trying to do for you. And finally, I've talked to Zoe, and she's not being reasonable either. You need to come home. This isn't healthy. I read them all. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new message window and typed just one email. To Ryan and Lillian. Subject update message. I'm fine. Please don't worry. I no longer need anyone managing my life. Take care. Mom. I hit send and closed my laptop. There was nothing more to say. Later that afternoon, Zoe found me on the terrace, sitting with my notebook open, a cup of cold tea beside me. She had her phone in one hand and a tight look on her face that I hadn't seen before. Steely determined. They're calling me now, she said, slipping into the chair beside mine. Mom, especially. I nodded slowly. I figured they would. She's trying to make me feel guilty, Zoe said. She told me I was being selfish, that I'm choosing you over the rest of the family, that I've let you manipulate me. I stayed quiet, let her speak. She even said you're not well, that I should be careful not to encourage your delusions. I looked down at my notebook. The pages fluttered slightly in the wind, like they too wanted to speak. Zoe took a breath. I told her to stop. When I looked at her, her eyes were wet, but firm. I told her to stop trying to control me with guilt. I said, Mom, you can't use love like a leash. You don't get to define loyalty by how much someone agrees with you. My chest tightened, but I kept my expression calm. She didn't take it well, Zoe added. She cried. Then she yelled. Then she hung up. I reached over and placed my hand gently on hers. That was brave. She said I've changed, Zoe whispered. And maybe I have. But Grandma, I needed to. You're the only one who's ever looked at me like a person, not a checklist. Not a reflection of how well she's parenting. You don't treat me like a performance. You just see me. My hand tightened around hers. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I didn't realize how much that mattered, she said. Until now. We sat in silence, the soft hush of the waves brushing against the edge of the afternoon. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the porch. Camilla's wind chimes danced gently in the breeze, their notes blending with the distant calls of seabirds. Finally, Zoe leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm not going back yet," she said. "I told my professors I want to do a full semester remotely. I want to stay here, learn from you, be with you." "You don't have to do that for me," I said quietly. "I'm not doing it for you," she replied. "I'm doing it for me." I closed my eyes for a moment. The words so simple settled over me like warmth. I didn't realize how much I'd needed to hear them. For years, my worth had been tied to how useful I could be to others. The meals I cooked, the money I quietly sent, the space I made for everyone else to shine. But now here was someone choosing me, not for what I provided, but for who I was. That evening, after Zoe went to journal by the water, I stayed behind on the terrace, watching the tide pull in and out with steady rhythm. My tea had gone cold again, but I didn't mind. The sky burned orange and purple, and I sat there completely still, letting the peace of this place soak into my bones. The phone sat face down on the table beside me, silent. Still, whatever noise came next, from Ryan or Lillian or anyone else, could wait. For now, there was only this, the sound of the sea, the scent of salt and jasmine, the knowledge that I no longer needed to defend my decisions, and the deep, quiet joy of realizing she understood. Zoe saw me, and in her eyes, I was whole. The scent of garlic and fresh herbs filled the kitchen as Zoe stirred a pot of something that had started as an experiment, but was quickly turning into dinner. I stood beside her chopping vegetables on the worn wooden cutting board David once picked up at a market in Honolulu, back when he was scouting this house without ever telling me. The fan whirred softly overhead. The radio played a faint jazz tune that neither of us could name, but both of us moved to anyway. Grandma Zoe said, smiling down into the bubbling sauce. "Did you ever imagine this?" I looked around at the tiled counters, the open windows framing the sea, the notebook beside my wine glass half filled with scribbled thoughts and half-finished paragraphs. I smiled. "Not in a million years." She laughed. "Me either, but I think I needed it more than I realized." It had been 3 weeks since she'd called her university and requested a transfer to a study abroad program based in Maui. Her professors had been surprisingly supportive. She would finish her degree remotely, focusing on international studies and literature, and would live here with me, at least for a semester, maybe more. We didn't talk about how long. That wasn't the point. Every morning now started with coffee on the terrace and ended with either a shared meal or a shared silence, both equally sacred. In between, we walked the local markets, helped Camilla in her garden, and wrote a lot. I had finally finished the first chapter of my memoir. Zoe read it one night on the porch while the sun dipped low and the light turned golden and forgiving. When she finished, she looked at me with tear-glossed eyes and said, "Grandma, you didn't just survive. You escaped." I shook my head. I didn't escape. I was never in a cage with locked doors, just one where I'd forgotten the latch worked from the inside. She nodded, still holding the pages. That last line. It got me. The last line of Chapter 1. I didn't run away. I just stopped living in a cage I was never meant to fit inside. It was the truth, and it had taken me nearly 70 years to write. That same week, we scheduled a video call with Camilla, who had returned briefly to her daughter's home on the Big Island, to help after a surgery. Zoe sat beside me at the dining table laptop, open, her legs tucked beneath her fresh flowers in a jar nearby that we had picked together that morning. Camilla's smile filled the screen. "You look good, both of you," she said, adjusting her camera. "We feel good," I replied. "Actually, we've been thinking." Zoe jumped in. "We want to start a writing group." Camilla's eyes lit up. "Here in the village," I said. "Women like me. Older, maybe forgotten by their families or simply unsure how to begin again. I want to offer them what you and Zoe gave me: space. Permission. A place to put their words without apology." Camilla beamed. "I know at least 6 ladies who'd show up tomorrow. We're thinking Tuesday mornings, Zoe added, ever the organizer now, with tea and fruit and maybe a little music. Not too much structure, I said. Not everyone wants to write a book. Some just want to remember who they were before someone else told them who they had to be. We agreed to start in 2 weeks. Camila would help with space and invitations. Zoe would help design a simple flyer. I would write the opening prompt for the first gathering. That night, as we washed dishes side by side, Zoe asked me if I thought David would have been proud. I paused. David was always 10 steps ahead, I said softly. He didn't leave me this house to hide from the world. He left it to help me remember I had more world left to live. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I'm glad he did. After we dried the last plate, we stepped outside onto the terrace. The sky was painted in watercolor strokes. Lavender orange, deepening indigo. The stars were beginning to blink awake. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rhythm of the ocean and the wind rustling through the lemon trees. Zoe reached for my hand. You know you saved me too. I looked at her. I didn't know who I was anymore, she said. College made me feel like I had to be 100 different versions of myself. Student sorority girl, daughter resume builder. But here I just get to be Zoe, and I like her. I like her too, I whispered. She squeezed my hand, and then as if it had been waiting all along, the final thought came to me, clear, full, and still. David gave me this house, I said, voice soft. Zoe turned to me. But you, I continued, looking at her, you made it a home. Her eyes shimmered in the starlight. And in the quiet that followed, I felt the fullness of something I had thought was lost to me forever. Not just peace, but purpose. Not just survival, but joy. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel late. I felt exactly on time. Thank you for listening to my story. Have you ever felt like your love was taken for granted, like you were being quietly erased by the very people you once built your life around? If so, I hope this story reminded you that it's never too late to choose yourself, to protect your peace, and to rediscover who you are beyond what others expect. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever walked away quietly and found your strength on the other side? And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss another voice like mine. There are more stories to come. About mothers, grandmothers, and women like you who are learning to live for themselves. We'll be here waiting.